Coffee with Coker is a healthcare business podcast from the Coker Group that focuses on solutions to help healthcare organizations effectively navigate the changing healthcare industry landscape. Hey, welcome to Coffee with Coker. And this is actually a nice change for us as this is our first in-person recording of the podcast since COVID really kicked off a couple of years ago now. So it's nice to be back and doing this in person. And today we have a topic we haven't covered a lot on the podcast, which is nice. So it's some new material and new guests with us. So joining me we have two folks from the Coker team. They actually head up our executive search and executive recruiting services. So we have Perrett and Richard Ballard with us. And so I want to welcome you guys to the podcast. And as I said, Lee and Richard are from our executive search service line. And so that's what we're talking about today. Specifically, what we're talking about are some of the recent trends and things that Lee and Richard and the team have observed as it relates to hiring and HR, and obviously talking healthcare entities. And, I think these are very applicable all around to really any type of healthcare entity. But on the healthcare services side, we do our work mainly with hospital executives, health systems, and large groups, and then even working with hospital owned or led physician networks. So kind of diving right in, I guess, as it relates to trends, a great place to start right now is something that's has become very prevalent in the last couple years since COVID, which is this kind of hybrid or remote workforce and that dynamic. And I think it's across all industries and types of businesses, clearly. But I think it's been very unique and very interesting to watch specifically within the healthcare world, because there's only so much you can do in terms of working remote in certain aspects of healthcare. But the industry has had to evolve very quickly. And we've talked about this, but how maybe kick us off here and just talk about, how remote work and the, kind of new normal, if you will, is driving healthcare transformation.
Right. Thanks, Mark. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And as you said, the hybrid remote work is transforming businesses and the way people go about their work and how they perform their work, not only in healthcare, but across the spectrum of different businesses. The COVID pandemic obviously has affected pretty much every business in the country, and obviously has had a significant impact on healthcare in the workplace and caused a lot of changes. Some of the statistics that are out there show that a vast majority of human resources leaders, upwards of 90%, expect that at least some of their employees will work remotely and have that opportunity after the pandemic is over. And that shift of hybrid work will be a massive driver of transformation that leaders must be prepared to support. These working conditions and flexibility that were brought about by the pandemic have created a desire by many people to maintain or increase that flexibility, and employers should be prepared for this trend. A lot of people realize that even though there were a lot of downsides to being at home during the pandemic, there were a lot of upsides, such as saving on a commute. If your average commute is 30 minutes to an hour a day each way, then you've got an hour to 2 hours a day that you can use for other purposes. And I had a candidate actually that part of her job responsibilities were meetings and talking with physicians every day. And she said the fact that she could stay home now during the pandemic and from 6:30 in the morning until about 8, which is when most of the physicians are available for meetings and or video conferences or speaking on the phone, that was the ideal time for her to catch these physicians. And because she did not have to drive into work and spend that hour each morning and each afternoon, she was vastly more productive. And so we're seeing that a lot of candidates are asking about when we're recruiting for a new position. That's one of the questions that they now ask is, does this organization or this hospital or this physician group offer a hybrid type of arrangement for working remotely if the position allows for that? So it's a trend now, and we think it's going to continue to increase in the near future.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's a good point, particularly, and I think it's unique specifically here to healthcare and healthcare services, because you're right. That is usually for business related stuff, operational items. Those earlier times in the morning is definitely where physicians are typically more available, or even in the evening. And again, that you may have a little bit more flexibility doing those things if you aren't having to kind of do the conventional get into the office, that type of thing. And I think people have seen that kind of across the board. One of the things that we've observed, again, this is not exclusive to healthcare, but the phrase "the Great Resignation" has been thrown around a good bit now for a while. The needs of finding people and recruiting and keeping workforce productive, but not overworked because of capacity issues, all of those things that we've seen, and it's very interesting coming out of the pandemic. I have to think that skill sets that are required now, well, let me ask you, have they evolved, the needs for different skill sets and developing diverse skill sets, or is it kind of like we just need bodies, or how does that work?
Newer skill sets are required for, evolving jobs, and jobs that have been posted, 3 or 4 years ago. The skill sets that are being required to fill those jobs over the next 3 or 4 years are kind of being realized now. And so we're looking at evolving skill sets, if you will, in the marketplace.
Is that attributed to, obviously, the pandemic factors into that? Is that us evolving, and I say us, I mean the healthcare system and the industry itself, is that evolving as a result of the pandemic, or is it more related to the fact that we just don't have the bodies anymore, and or as much as we need, and the capacity issues that have developed as a result?
It is capacity issues, but it's also like the pandemic showed us kind of gaps in the healthcare system, and it was incredibly telling as to where our liabilities were. And so I think the skill sets are evolving from the standpoint of, we just didn't know that we needed those skill sets until we were presented with the opportunity to see where our faults were. Mm-hmm. And we have operated, I think, under the assumption that we had everything that we needed in the healthcare continuum until we were, faced with the new challenges. Kind of
forced into dealing with things that...
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of them, again, was, the remote hybrid work schedule, if you will. And I think that was, one of the trends that we see that emerged from us developing, new skill sets, or the workforce having developed new skill sets.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that we've seen is that in a lot of cases, it is generally easier and probably less expensive if an organization can train their current employees on these new skill sets, rather than going out and recruiting for someone new from outside. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the current employee is already culturally aware of the organization. They enjoy working there, most likely, if they're still there. They may desire an opportunity to be promoted or developed. And so if you've got as an example, maybe a position that's open that does not require a college degree, if it's a clinical position, you might have some individuals in your organizations that are hard workers, good employees, loyal, dedicated, that you may want to tap to move up into those positions that might not require a degree, but are a higher level of experience is required, and you can train those individuals versus going out and trying to recruit them. There's a talent shortage right now, pretty much up and down the chain from CEO down to entry level. So if you've already got a loyal employee that's doing a good job and that wants to be developed and trained, the Human Resources Department and Training Department or those leaders can determine who might be a good fit, approach that individual, see if they'd be interested in that, and it could be on-the-job training even before you promote them. So those skills can be trained and developed internally, but the organizations need to determine what skills those are that are needed not only now, but that might be needed a year from now or 2 years from now, and do some internal recruiting, if you will, of those individuals that they think might be good in those roles. And then once they move into those roles, you can then, if they're in an entry-level job, you can recruit back to backfill them on that entry-level position, which is generally easier than someone that you're looking for with experience. So that's going to become more of a trend as well.
And I'm kind of thinking about hospitals and health systems here, but it could apply to a lot of different types of entities. But have the HR departments and some of these types of entities had to evolve in that way as far as getting a little bit more innovative, and not just in connecting people and roles, but even like you mentioned, Lee, the training, and even perhaps embracing this remote dynamic or hybrid where, you got to figure out that you got to have the technology for training, both in person and remote. And you got to be able to, adapt. Have they been pretty hard pressed to do that?
Yes, the human resources departments in general, particularly in healthcare hospitals and healthcare systems, and also within physician groups, are generally, they've got their hands full. A lot of times they're understaffed. They don't have as many people in their organization as they would like to, due to a lot of different reasons, primarily budget and overhead and headcount. So yes, they are. That's one of the things that they're wrestling with, is how do not only do they hire good people into current positions, but how do they look at it from a strategic standpoint of succession planning? And we encourage the human resources departments to try to obviously have the senior human resources individual, whether it's a chief human resources officer or VP of HR or director of HR, whatever that senior HR role is, to be part of the discussion with the senior leadership team and talking about succession planning. And that shouldn't be a once a year dust off the binder and talk about it. It should be probably every quarter when you talk about who could succeed someone in a key position. And if there's no one in that role, is the plan to recruit outside, or probably the more strategic decision would be who is inside that could do that role, and are they ready now if that role opened up? If they're not ready now, what do they need ready future? And is that 1 to 3 months? And if ready future, what do they need to do to get to the point where they could move into that role? And if there's no one there, but you need to train somebody, identify who those individuals are and start a training and development program. So yes, the HR departments are aware of this. Any HR people that are out there listening to this, that's preaching to the choir. You already know this, but if you can influence your senior leaders to discuss how critical this is from a strategic standpoint, to be able to replace individuals in key positions. And that's not just executives. There may be some key clinical positions or some key managerial or director positions. If you can start now to figure out how you're going to replace those. And again, external recruiting is always an option, but that's more costly generally and typically might be slower. But that's something that should be on every HR person's radar. Mm-hmm. And depending on how robust their training and development department is, they should be partners with those individuals to work strategically with the senior team on those initiatives.
Yeah. I should have said this in the intro, but I'd like to point out that folks may be surprised or unaware of the fact that Coker is involved in executive search and HR consulting. And we like to say or point out that, Coker is not an executive search firm But we've taken I would say, an unconventional approach to this whole realm and dynamic around whether it's executives actually engaging in a search process or advising in a very consultative manner on HR related things. And I think the need we've seen since the pandemic kicked off, the need for this, particularly in healthcare services organizations, has just grown maybe exponentially. But we have continuously promoted this idea, what you just talked about, Lee, which is, succession planning should not be something that happens only at the executive or board level, and it should not start when you need to fill a role, right? It should be ongoing. It should be part of the strategic plan that, like you said, Lee, is addressed regularly, and then the training can follow a similar course as well, which you just talked about. But I think that's something you guys probably see more than anything, or a good bit, is the scramble. The industry, the system has been in a continuous scramble to a certain extent with COVID. But that is something now I think we're far enough ahead of it, or organizations are able to get far enough ahead of it now that hopefully they can, start really working on some of those future initiatives. One of the things that we also get involved in a good bit, though, is with our clients is interim solutions, right? And sometimes even if you have the best planning and the best intentions, sometimes you're going to have an interim solution. And it's, I think, even more so now because some of these searches for a permanent role is just taking longer and longer. So maybe, Richard, talk about kind of how we have worked with organizations on embracing interim leadership.
Interim leadership will allow some flexibility for an organization to actually try an executive on prior to doing a long-term contract. It actually helps relieve some of the pressures on the executive management team and will allow them the ability to deploy a national search to bring in, an executive that's a true cultural fit. Mm-hmm. The flexibility, I feel, is significant, and it will allow, the determination for a correct fit, for an absolute good fit on a long-term basis. And there are many executives out there that have this skill set that have either retired or are looking for, a change, but a short-term opportunity. And they have the skill sets, they have the experience to come in and manage, a multiple hospital system, and to do it with efficiency, and to be able to come in and, in some instances, train the person that will, assume the position behind them. So it's an extra, if you will, arrow in the quiver to allow the healthcare system the ability to bring in who they need and be able to effectively put new management in position.
Yeah, I mean, like how many of those stories have we heard about or witnessed those situations where an organization, has to fill a role, and even if they go through a pretty well-ran or exhaustive search process, they're still working on a timeline here that may result in pressure to choose on the lesser of the options, right? And I think you don't always know that. I mean, it's always going to take time to really know if someone's the right fit, particularly when you're talking about an executive level of like a hospital, health system, or a group. In this case, an individual that's working with clinicians, with physicians, with a diverse base of people in terms of skill set and training and personalities. So, I think having that option, Richard, to your point, and the flexibility it brings, I think organizations I've seen, there's a tremendous value there.
And to your point, Mark, a lot of times when we do have an interim, and these are not just C-level interims, although those are the ones that we usually will place, but They can, when we occasionally will do an interim solution for someone to hold down the fort until they find a permanent solution. And a lot of times we'll also be working on that search. And so we tell the candidates that you'll have an opportunity to talk to the person that's currently in that interim role, and they can give you the straight scoop about what's going on. So if it's a chief financial officer, and we've had a client where we had a chief financial officer and a chief executive officer interim in those roles, and we had the candidates come in and sit down and talk with our interim who was in there filling that role, and they could ask the technical questions about, tell me about the finances or tell me about the operations. And so our interim is actually able to share real-time live data with them. They can ask questions and get a better feel for the organization, much more in depth than I would be able to provide as the recruiter. And that helps not only the candidate to get a better feel for the role before they would take an offer to take it full time, but also the interim can help answer questions and also help evaluate the candidate. We also do interim work all the way down to, say, the director or manager level, particularly in revenue cycle. That's a big need out there right now. We have a physician services group led by Brant Jewell, and as he's dealing with physician groups and they have revenue cycle needs, Brant has the ability and a core group of independent contractor consultants that will go in as interims and work with that group as a revenue cycle manager or director. And we also place interim individuals into those senior level roles with systems and revenue cycle roles. So the beauty of the interim role is that if someone goes in as an interim and it turns out that they are very interested in the role to take it full time, and the client says, we really like this person, we'd like to hire them full time, we can facilitate that. And both parties sort of, the analogy I use is it's like test driving a car. Both get to test drive to see, is this something I would like to do full time? The client organization says, is this person a good fit? Both of them see if it's a good cultural fit. If it's in a location that's different from where they're living, they get to see if they like the location and if they and their family would like to live there. So it's a win-win-win for everyone. And so we've had that happen on occasion as well. So the interim solution is pretty broad, but we do have that capability. We've got, as Richard mentioned, we've got people out there, and the term I use is a senior level experienced people who have retired, but they don't want to quit working, and they don't want to just go full retirement, but they don't want to work full time either. So the interim solution for them is perfect, and they can go in and we've had interims go in as short as a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, as long as a year or longer. Mm-hmm. So it's a great solution on top of our solutions of placing people into full-time roles in an executive search.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, as far as the types of people, like when we place an interim, when we put one of a COCR person in an interim role for a client, what types of people they typically are. So you kind of just mentioned retired and folks that still want to do something, but they're kind of not wanting to be restricted to one thing. Is that typical? It's
typical. And we've got, again, thinking about a recent client assignment, we've had CFO and a CEO. Both we were very experienced. Both had worked as CFOs and CEOs at hospitals and healthcare systems in different parts of the country. And the value to the organization that's hiring them as an interim is they get experience from someone who's been there, done that somewhere else, and bring some new ideas to them. And they can, and that's one of the value adds of hiring an interim is they've got a lot of experience from usually multiple locations, and they're very experienced. They know how to deal with boards of directors. They know how to deal with senior operational leaders. They know how to deal with physicians and physician leadership. If it's a medical group practice, they've got experience there dealing with physician groups. And so the beauty of it is they've got a jack of all trades kind of person who's been out there before and successfully run physician groups or hospitals, and so it expands the gamut. We can also place chief nursing officers, chief medical officers, and so those are mostly the ones we place in interim roles. But as mentioned earlier, we can go down to the managerial and director level and revenue cycle experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good explanation, because when people hear interim, it's one specific thing may come to their mind. But what I'm hearing from you, and what I know from our collective experience here at Coker is interim really can apply to a number of situations. It can be that relief valve, with just kind of provide some support, filling a gap, whatever it may need. It can be that trial, that test drive, like you said, because I think one of the things that one of the key drivers, in my opinion, that results in an executive or a senior operational leader is the fit. And you're not going to know that without some time. Not only time on the front end recruiting process and putting in the due diligence and all of the stuff that goes along with that, but the time being there and knowing, and I don't know if it's as little as 30 days or as much as full year or somewhere in between there, probably. But that's when you really figure out if someone, okay, this is going to be a long-term fit for both sides. Mm-hmm. And having that resource. And then, like you said, also bringing in people that have, and I can think of a number of the people that we use in these interim executive roles and the just decades of experience they're bringing. So it's almost like a full-time consultant in there for a period of time, for some limited duration. And just getting that outside perspective, while at the same time you can be finding or looking for that permanent fit. So I think that's probably helpful for people to know on the interim stuff, because I think that's one of the things that sometimes gets overlooked. I want to switch gears here, if you don't mind, and I want to talk about priorities of executive leadership and how those have changed, how they've evolved. Where are they typically at? What are those priorities kind of centered on now, particularly in this world of COVID, post-COVID, moving forward?
Yes, Mark. There's the standard ones that always come to mind, but then there are also some new ones. But top executives now, and these are difficult positions. Being an executive in a large physician group or in a hospital or healthcare system is not an easy role. So those individuals need to focus on what the day-to-day business of running the group practice or a hospital, but they need to prepare themselves to, and as well as their team, to greater accountability for driving innovation, executive business transformation, if you will, in a hybrid work model. How do we do things differently now that people are expecting hybrid work models? And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of candidates, they're putting that pretty much at the top of their list about why should I consider working with this organization? And that's one of the things that's going to be the norm in the future. And there are ways to develop your workforce planning strategy that can fit into that hybrid model and make it more attractive to candidates up and down the organization. And support that hybrid work model by using a human-centric design, if you will, offer flexible experiences, enable intentional collaboration, drive empathy-based management, putting themselves in the shoes of the employee who, again, may have been at home for a year. They may or may not have small children, but putting yourselves in the shoes of those individuals, and how can you maximize the human resources of your organization, meet the needs of the organization itself. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of situation. You can adapt it for each organization. The dynamic approach and the proactive approach to manage shifting skills needs, which we touched on earlier, thinking about what you have now or where your deficiencies are in your skills, and then figuring out a way to develop your internal people for those skills, or to hire people from outside who have those skills if you don't have internal people to do those roles with those new skills. Long-term workforce resilience is something that you probably read about in the papers or online. People are leaving organizations and sometimes leaving the whole profession. They're just burned out, or they're tired of what they're doing. So reassess the workforce support offerings to drive workforce health, not just performance, making sure your employees are healthy physically as well as mentally, and that the workplace is a place where you're going to support that healthy workforce through having your employees be mentally and physically healthy. Continue to accelerate the progress on the diversity and equity initiative goals, establishing accountability for DEI potentially in organization leaders, looking at the makeup of their departments or their teams and continuing to emphasize how important that is. Elevate the personal and board impact by targeting and evaluating senior leaders and board leaders' success, and organizing the HR function. I mentioned that earlier, that the HR functions are generally understaffed, in my opinion. And I'm a former corporate HR person, so I'm speaking from experience. I know how difficult those positions are and how many different plates you have to have spinning successfully at any given time. But if the HR function is not organized appropriately to achieve the goals of the organization, and those functions need to be agile, they need to be customer centric, and they need to be operationally efficient. So HR functions should take a look at itself and see if they're doing everything they can to maintain maximum efficiency of the people that work for the organization. And then again, interim leadership is something that the top executives could take a look at to see if that could be a potential solution to some of their short or midterm gaps that they may have. So there are probably a lot more than that, but those are just a handful.
Yeah, that's helpful to run through those. And thinking about it, on one hand, I don't envy HR departments within healthcare organizations. On the other hand, I think you're seeing, and Richard, to your earlier point, us collectively, again, saying us, but the industry starting to address things that and innovate in ways that probably were needed long before. I know I've seen in numerous cases the HR department of very large health systems even was just kind of, not that they were a priority or an afterthought or anything like that, but they didn't get the funding, the resources, the people they perhaps needed or could have used, the technology. And I think now we're seeing that the priority, because of the demand and the capacity issues and the fact that you're dealing with folks that you mentioned, or how healthy the workforce is physically, mentally, et cetera. And the need there in an industry where they're being directly exposed to very serious, risk to themselves. It's an uphill climb, but it's going to require those types of things and others as well that you guys work on all the time. But reorganizing or rethinking, reapproaching, however you want to put it, an HR department, I think, is something that a lot of organizations could or should consider. And then again, to your last point and what we just talked about, the ability to interject fresh and different perspective through an interim hopefully alleviates some of that pressure of trying to boil the ocean, as it were, if they feel like they need to make big changes. So that's extremely helpful. And I think all of this is very, very relevant to our clients. If they're thinking about their workforce in the future and their needs there, not just in, again, the capacity issues that we're seeing today or that we've seen through COVID, but as far as fueling growth, the demand for healthcare is only increasing, not just because of COVID, but because of the aging population and the demands that's going to continue to put on the healthcare system. And it's only accelerated by the, impact of things like COVID and depending on how that evolves, I don't think it's going away. We use this term, the new normal, and I know everybody's tired of it. I certainly am, but it is what it is. And we are going to have to deal with that. So this is extremely helpful. And I do want to remind folks that there are a lot of options out there, and we run through some of those as it relates to Again, whether it's a search or if it's an interim need or if it's something else related to HR and personnel, we do a lot in that realm. And, we like to take the approach of people that understand the healthcare business, and obviously people and personnel and workforce is a critical element there. So we do a lot of work in that area, and we've written a lot, we published a lot, and we speak a lot on that topic. So there's resources out there on our website, and we'll continue this conversation as well, because it's obviously timely, but it's something that's going to it's an ongoing evolution, and we're going to need to stay on top of it as we move through. So I appreciate you guys being willing to talk about this for a few minutes. Again, it's not going to be the last time we talk about it. So I'll look forward to continuing the dialogue and following these new trends in the future. Otherwise, thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of Coffee with Coker, and we thank you for listening. We want to encourage all of our listeners to participate and contribute in the podcast. So if you have any questions on any of the things we discussed in this episode, any of the topics that were presented, please feel free to ask us. Also, we welcome your feedback and suggestions. If you have any ideas related to the material we discussed in this episode, or in any episode, please let us know and we'll make sure to incorporate it. And if you have ideas for topics you'd like to hear more information about in future episodes, please send those suggestions to us. We would love to hear them, and we'd love to incorporate them into our future episodes. You can find us online and on social media. Start with our website, and specifically the podcast is coffeewithcoker.com. You can also find that through the main Coker website at cokergroup.com. You can also find us on social media, Twitter at Coker Group, and then on LinkedIn, you can search for Coker Group and find our page and the page for some of our team members as well there. So you can find us and reach out to us in a number of places. And then if you want to contact us directly, one of the best ways to do that, email feedback@cokergroup.com. That's feedback@cokergroup.com. And again, we'd love to get your feedback. And we'd love to encourage everyone to subscribe to the podcast so that you can be notified when future episodes are released. We look forward to the next episode, and we look forward to getting your suggestions and feedback on this episode. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to speaking with you again on future episodes.